The space program has brought us so many innovations, hundreds of them. I'll give you just a few examples. The infrared thermometers that we used during the pandemic, the computer mouse, the small cameras that you have in your phones, air purifiers, water purifiers, and even the life-saving continuous insulin pump. Hi, my name is Dorit Donoviel. I'm Executive Director of the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, or TRISH for short. We're partnered with NASA. We search the world for innovations that can keep humans healthy in space. So what does that have to do with you and me? I get that question all the time. As a biologist, space is a wonderful place for me to study human physiology. It is such an incredible environment. The lack of gravity, the increase in radiation causes so many changes to occur to the human body. And even the healthiest of people have a lot of challenges. So when astronauts go to space, they do have a lot of challenges. I'll just give you a few examples. Astronauts have trouble sleeping. They have an increased risk in cancer, and their heart becomes deconditioned. So as we're trying to prevent these things from happening to these lovely humans that go into space, we have to track them really carefully. And the innovations that we're developing in order to prevent and track these conditions are actually helping us make us all healthier here on Earth. Let me tell you about Scott Kelly. Scott went to space for a year. It was actually 340 days, but Scott likes to say it was close enough for government work. Now, we studied Scott extremely carefully. In fact, we compared him to his identical twin brother, Senator Mark Kelly, a former astronaut, of course, who stayed on Earth. Now, Scott's body, when he was in space, underwent many of the changes, some of which I mentioned earlier, and a lot others. His bones and his muscles turned over all the time. He was deconditioned. Let's see what Scott looks like when he came back to Earth. So this video you see here is immediately after coming back to Earth from flight. And you could see that Scott is having troubles walking. It's not just the lack of balance, but also the lack of bone and muscle conditioning as well. So as time went on, and that last little clip was actually a day after Scott returned, you saw he was getting better. But Scott would have been in a lot worse shape if he didn't exercise every single day when he was on the space station. In fact, astronauts exercise up to 2 hours a day. And this isn't unique for Scott being up on space station for nearly a year. This can happen to astronauts who are up there for even a few weeks as well. So exercise is absolutely important because without vitamin D and exercise, astronauts would become osteoporotic. So astronauts, in 1 month in space, without vitamin D and a lot of exercise, lose as much bone as postmenopausal women do in a year here on Earth. So as we're trying to prevent these things from happening to astronauts, we're making insights and improving the conditions for people here on Earth suffering from similar conditions, such as osteoporosis. NASA had to figure this out. They had to figure out a way to exercise without weights in space. So what you see in the top left corner is a female astronaut working on what we call the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device that loads the bones and the muscles without using weights. This technology is absolutely critical for astronaut health, and it was used actually to develop the exercise machines of today, including the device you see there that folks use today in the home. And in fact, NASA technologies gave rise to some of the materials that went into athletic shoes to support the feet while exercising as well. So these innovations in exercise equipment are important. But did you also know that NASA innovations gave rise to LASIK surgery and scratch-resistant lenses? Thank goodness for that, because I have animals and kids. What you see here, you may not recognize it, but it's a whole bunch of technologies that you would have in an eye care clinic here today. So as you go to your eye doctor once a year, you get checked out. It turns out that spaceflight actually affects vision as well. We have to have all of those capabilities in space as well. How do we make room for them on a small, limited footprint that we have up in space? This is Mike Barrett. Mike spent a long-duration space flight, and we've known this for a while, but as astronauts would go up, their vision would change. In fact, you see Mike's glasses hanging over his t-shirt. Mike and his crewmates realized that their vision was changing quite a bit over their long-duration flight. And when astronauts have gone up, they would take up different pairs of glasses because they recognized over time their prescription kept changing. But Mike realized that the prescription changed so much, his vision and his crewmates' vision changed so much that they were kind of curious about what was going on. There was an eye imaging capability on board, and he and his crewmates looked into each other's eyes. And they found something much more concerning than a change in prescription. They saw a swelling around their optic nerves, a brand new condition that we hadn't seen before. So this is concerning, of course, because in patients on Earth where you see a swelling around the optic nerve, if that's not resolved, it can end up causing to vision loss or blindness, loss of peripheral vision. So we have to track the health of the eyes and the vision of the astronauts. So we need all of those things I showed you in that giant room in an eye clinic, but we can't take all those things into space. And if you're thinking about a mission to Mars or a mission to the moon, you can't bring an eye care clinic with you. So what we're working on is miniaturizing and putting all of those devices into one compact everything device. And that's what we're working on. So we really don't understand this condition. It's been dubbed the Spaceflight-Associated Neuroocular Syndrome, or SANS for short. And we really don't know what's causing it. We think that there's a fluid shift that occurs because of the lack of gravity. So all the fluids that would normally go down in your feet go up towards the head, and that may be causing a swelling around the eye structures. So this is definitely concerning, and we need to track it to make sure astronauts don't lose vision. So the technologies and the capabilities and the insights that we're making really have a lot of implications for conditions here on Earth that affect vision, for example, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, and others. Now, the technology that went into developing CT scans and MRI imaging actually came from the space program. It was developed during the Apollo era and stitching together images from the lunar surface. This type of modality is taken for granted here on Earth. If you have any kind of health issue, your doctor will order a CT scan, and you go in and have this done. We also need to track the health of astronauts in space, and if we are suspecting a medical condition, we have to use some medical imaging. This device and an MRI, they're way too big to take up into space. So NASA, for the last 2 decades, has been using ultrasound is the modality of choice. Using ultrasound in ways that normally you would use a CT or an MRI scan. Now, what you see here is a revolutionary new ultrasound device that just came out a couple of years ago. Normal ultrasound devices are on a cart, they have multiple probes and they do different things, and an expert uses them when you go in for an ultrasound scan. Well, everything has been miniaturized into this one probe that can run off of a smartphone, and a non-expert user can use it. And astronauts have been doing ultrasound to scan themselves and their crewmates for the last decade. And we're learning a lot about how to use ultrasound in new ways. Now, astronauts will use ultrasound for both clinical reasons, to check their health, as well as for research. In fact, astronauts consider their bodies so important for research. I have a cosmonaut friend of mine, a retired cosmonaut friend of mine, Sergei Volkov, who said to me, "Your body does not belong to you. It belongs to science." So on a recent space mission, Serena Anand-Chancellor was using an ultrasound to scan the crew using a protocol for a research study. She sent down some of the images down to Earth, and some of our radiologist experts that consult for NASA took a look at those images. Nobody was expecting to find anything. Surprised everybody that one of the crew members on her mission had a blood clot in the jugular vein. And in fact, what was interesting, in addition to seeing the clot that was completely unexpected, we saw instead of the blood flowing down away from the head and towards the heart, as you normally would in a vein, we saw the blood was standing still, probably due to the lack of gravity. Now, this is fascinating, and it also has implications for patients, for example, ALS patients and multiple sclerosis. So we're going to look at this very carefully. Now, if you had a blood clot on a mission and you were on the surface of the moon, it would be a very bad day indeed. So we have to develop the capabilities to not just treat the clot, diagnose it, but a whole bunch of things in order to make sure that whatever medical condition does occur when our humans are exploring space on the surface of the moon or on the surface of a distant planet like Mars, we absolutely have to develop innovations to track their health. So whether you are on the moon's surface or maybe you just live in what's called a medical desert, a remote community where you have no access to a major hospital system, or maybe even a clinic, the technologies that we're developing for astronauts who are going to be exploring the moon will be important in places like this on Earth. So lately, it's been really exciting because commercial spaceflight has really changed the landscape. All of a sudden now, we're seeing regular people going into space, not just NASA astronauts. And these individuals are actually taking part in our research studies. They let us actually check their own health. They let us test devices to monitor the changes that occur to their bodies in space. And so we're really excited to make those insights to increase our knowledge about human physiology and prevent medical conditions from occurring. So what does space have to do with you and me? I put it to you that the innovations from space are driving us to make insights about our bodies and prevent medical conditions from occurring and let us live a much healthier life here on Earth. Thank you.